Hello and welcome to another video. Today I will be going through the process I used to paint up this Dark Angels Captain from the Dark Vengeance box set, I believe. So for a start, I'm going to lay down some base coats. Caliban Green for the armor and Xandri Dust. Now normally I would be doing some zenithal highlighting with either white or grey primer on the model, but since there's not a lot of armor visible on this particular model, I'm going to do a lot of the... I'm not going to rely on the underlayer of primer for some assisted highlights, basically. So, this process will be fairly long and, quite frankly, not too interesting, so let's skip through to something that is interesting. So I've already gone ahead and finished most of the main base coats. The colours I have used are Screamer Pink for the cloak, Xandri Dust for one part of the robe components, of course Caliban Green for the armour as I mentioned earlier, and yeah, that's pretty much it. The format of this video will also be slightly different from the way I normally handle these sorts of things, as I'm going to be jumping a bit back and forth between the various stages, I suppose. Because normally when I'm doing a video, I tend to focus on one thing, demonstrate it in full and finish it, but this time I must admit I got bored, so I was jumping back and forth between things like put a highlight on a cloak, work on another layer somewhere else, so on and so forth. So the video won't be particularly coherent in terms of what I'm actually doing to the model. So in terms of colours, I'm mostly preparing everything for the first Agrax Earthshade wash. So yeah, just putting down the a layer of Mephiston Red on the bolter to keep it consistent with the tactical squad that I've already done so far. And yeah. During this phase I tend to be pretty messy, so for example, when colouring the cloak I tend to mess up the armour, so later on I go back and correct it. So there's a lot of back and forth in this stage for me, and like as with most painting, this part is quite frankly the most time-consuming part of the entire process. In comparison, the highlighting, even the pin washing, isn't that time-consuming. As always, the temptation here is to layer your paint on thick, but yeah, just don't do it. Keeping it thin will get a much nicer finish further down the track. So yeah, patience pays off. So we're on the tail end of the base colours now, or at very least the base colours that will be shading with Agrax Earthshade. So finally we're going to put down the parchment and purity seals with Rakarth Flesh, and I believe I am doing the actual wax seals corn red. So yeah, the usual back and forth until we've got uneven coverage, and then moving along to the next stage, which I believe is the the gold metallics stage. Okay, the colour I am using to do all of the gold trim and jewellery is Retributor Armour, I believe. The new alcohol-based GW metallic paint. People love it. I'm not entirely sure why. Like, it does go on better than the pre-existing GW gold metallics, I'll give it that, but in terms of consistency, I still think the Vallejo paints are probably better. Though I've currently got a bad gold in my Gay Mare batch, so that's something I'll have to make a mental note to get a new one of at some point. The advantage of this paint is that it does cover better than, well, as mentioned before, covered better than the existing GW metallics, and it'll more or less be completely opaque within 2 coats, so it's not the greatest thing around, but it works pretty well. Okay, now I believe I was lazy here and I forgot to do a video of the wash section, but you all should know how to do that now, so yeah, it's should all be good. So to just summarize what I did, wash all over the fabrics, the gold metallics, but for the armor I used Null oil and a pin wash, which is of course focus the wash directly in the crevices rather than doing a all over wash like I did with the clothing. Oh, the colour I used was Agrex Earthshade, in case I didn't already mention it for the clothing. Now this is a part which I don't think turned out particularly well in the end run. I'm putting on Celestra Grey on all of the ropes and the various wing components. In many respects, I think I'd prefer this model if it didn't have that stupid looking wing on his shoulder pad and the rather ostentatious helmet. Yeah, just I'd find it a lot cleaner, to be honest. But yeah, this is a light grey over a fairly dark colour, so this will take many thin coats. So let's skip ahead to the part which is, well, to the next part. I'm also going to paint the robes trim the same colour as the wings and the robes. Celestra Grey, I probably should have mentioned. Most of this work I am not, well, for the very edges, I'm not using paint which is as thin, as I want to actually start only catching the edge and making sure that it doesn't accidentally run into the crevices. Also, in case you haven't figured it out yet, I have upgraded my audio equipment, so that's probably why I sound a hell of a lot better this time around. So yeah, at some point I'm thinking of upgrading my camera and lighting a bit more. Some of my stills aren't coming out that well, and also the start and end shots are a bit too dark, so yeah, I think at some point as I continue to do this, another equipment upgrade is in order. But yeah, other more important things to save for at this stage. One bad habit of mine, which I'm really trying to get out of, is how I paint lines. I have a tendency to put the brush down and do one long stroke. Now this is not ideal. The best way to do it would be to do many thin, sort of like tapping strokes, like you're actually sketching. This is because, at least I find, as you tend to draw along, there's more chance of screwing up in one continuous motion. So do lots of little motions, and hopefully that would minimize any mistakes that might get made in the process of painting that line. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, the colour I will be using for the feathers is Rakarth Flesh, with a hint of Steel Legion Drab on the tip to give it, I don't know, a sort of mottled feather impression. And later on I'll be redoing the stem with Celestial Grey. Okay, now we're getting onto the stage of doing the wash for the white components. So you can see me playing around with my palette. And the colour I will be using is Nuln Oil for the ropes. And for the feather, I believe that's Agrax Earthshade. Now, once again, the idea is applied very specifically only to the areas which I've just coloured. In the case of the more softer detailed areas like the winged helmet and the winged shoulder pad, I'll be using Agrax Earthshade thinned out, there it is, thinned out with lots of Lamian Medium. This is to get a more gentle shade happening. So yeah, I'm going to apply this until it looks right for me, then I will let it dry, then come back to it, and we'll be on to the stage where we're actually doing our highlighting, and, well, layering and highlighting. Okay, full disclosure time. I was going to try and do something fancy with the sword, some object source lighting, but in the end it didn't work out, so I went back and forth with the sword a bunch of times, so you'll probably see that looking rubbish at one point, then okay, then rubbish again, and finally okay. Overall, I think this is only a mediocre paint job on my part, so I'm sorry, I'll try to do better next time. Yeah, so this is also the stage where I'm putting down my first layer of metal, which I believe is... I don't remember. I think it might be Model Air Metallic Black, followed by a layer of Model Air Gun Grey? Yeah, let's go with that. No, scratch that, yeah, I am right. My memory's just a bit slow catching up. Anyway, this is basically just putting on the base coat of the metallics. We're going to hit all of this with a Nuln Oil wash anyway, so let's skip ahead until something else happens. So yep, as promised, we'll put on a wash of Nuln oil, specifically over the metallics, and then we'll move on to getting our metallic highlights done. Well, probably once I'm done with everything else. Actually, no, another part I forgot there was the trim on the robe. I'm also going to do that the same color as the cloak. Another thing I did off camera were some of the what's the word? The wing iconography on his gauntlets. I painted that Celestra Grey. Okay, we are now moving on to the layering side of things. Yeah, so pretty much what I'm doing here is I'm restoring the original Screamer Pink, I think? Yeah. Hang on, I'm just gonna go check my paint sets. Wait one. Okay, definitely Screamer Pink. I'm sorry about that. Oh yeah, and as you can see, I'm doing a bit of the old back and forth right there, like putting the Celestra Grey on that trim which I'd missed the first time around. Anyway, so the idea is to restore the original colour and leave the shadows recessed. So yeah, pretty much standard operating procedure for highlighting cloth. Now I'm going to be a lot more sparing with the restoring the colour on the purple folds underneath his arms, because there would be less light hitting that area anyway, so you can afford to make the highlights a little more stark around there. Okay, since I didn't do that initial zenithal priming, I'm going to attempt to get that manually, and I think I pulled it off somewhat. What I'm doing is I'm mixing the Screamer Pink with Pink Horror, eventually. Well, once again, this is the old back and forth. I went and worked on something else while that layer was drying. So yeah, and I'll constantly layer Pink Horror up until I get a transition away from the base color. So yeah, this will happen about, hell, I think it happened about 5 or 6 times. And I'll also do a little bit on the parts in recess, but try to focus those highlights to a very small area, as you want to really accentuate the folds of the, well, not so much the folds, the curves of the cloth with this sort of work. With the folds, I skipped straight to the Pink Horror as a highlight. So yeah, highlighting the, well, rather restoring some of the colour to the parchment. That's with Rakarth Flesh, I believe. And as usual, I'm jumping all over the place with my colours. Yeah, it's... This isn't a really time-consuming stage to of the whole painting process. As always, the most time-consuming part is, and always, for me, is and always will be the layering. Generally, what I'm doing now is I'm restoring the main colour until I'm generally happy with it. I'm also going to do a 3-stage highlight with the with the lower robes, just like the purple robes. In this case, mixing, getting a 50-50 thin mix of Ushanti bone and use that to bring out the large flat areas which are in highlight, and then get the most sharpest creases with pure Ushanti bone, just like you would say with a guardsman's fatigues. Like flashbacks to painting lots and lots of Imperial guardsmen. Alright, so I think I made a mistake here. Rather than going to Ulthuan Grey, however you pronounce that colour, I went straight to white. And I think as a result, a lot of this work appeared to be somewhat rough, well, at least rougher than I was hoping. But no matter, I persevered and gradually built up the highlights where they needed to be, and yeah. Once again, the consistency is very, very thin, so almost glaze it up to a pure white highlight. Take your time, it's not a race. So I'm also going to highlight the wings and the other Celestia Grey components in pretty much the same way. Apart from the ropes, which I remember to actually use Ulthuan Grey to get those done. Anyway. So moving on to the wings, here I'm using, I think it's Celestia Grey? No, not Celestia Grey, Ulthuan Grey this time, and it's very, very thin, and I'm only applying very thin strips, trying to leave the very deepest recesses the original shade colour. So this is a very time-consuming bit of work, and you've got to be careful not to let the paint do coffee staining at the very end. So yeah, there's not much more to say other than take your time and be patient. So as we work along, we can see that the detail in the wings is starting to pop. It is pretty fine for this on this miniature, so you have to help it out by making sure you get your highlighting right. If you can manage that, it'll greatly help bring out the detail on the wings. And finally, another layer, this time start concentrating mostly towards the tip in order to really bring that contrast. And that is pretty much it. I'll just go back and clean up my mistakes and get moving on the rest of the wings. Alright, for the very edges of the trim, I'll be putting a very fine highlight of, I believe it's White Scar or something, or the equivalent. And yeah, one thing I'm not sure if I got footage of was the, I did a highlight for the armor in much the same way as I did the broad upper surfaces of the cloak. In this case, I mixed Warpstone Glow with Caliban Green, or will have, I'm not entirely sure if I've done that yet, and I'll gradually layer that up to get a similar effect as you can see on the cloak. But we'll get to that in all due time, maybe, depending on how good my footage was. Okay, moving on to the gold now. I will be layering this up, not our original base color of Retributor armor, but moving to the next up in the, the layer version of the Retributor armor. Well, it's technically not Triad, I suppose. But once again, I forget the name of the color. Bear with me for 1 second. Liberator Gold. That's the color I was referring to. So I'm going to use this to get a mid-tone going, leaving the deepest recesses of the gold, the Retributor armor shaded with Agrax Earthshade. So yeah, as you can see, it comes out to be quite a bright silverish gold, which it looks okay, I guess. It generally goes on a lot better than the pre-existing Citadel gold colored triads, so I'm pretty happy with it compared to all of my other attempts at doing gold so far, especially with Citadel colors. Doing some more Celestra Grey bits, which I'd completely forgotten about as well. And finally, for the final highlight of the gold, I'm going to attempt to do a very, very thin line of, I believe it's Vallejo Model Air Silver on the most exposed edges, but of course I'm jumping back and forth between my colours due to just a desire to get things done. And this is probably closer to how I would normally paint when I'm not recording. I'd quite happily jump back and forth between colours and the like. Alright, so once again, playing around with the sword. Much of my experimentation didn't work out, so I'm just gonna ignominiously skip over it until I get to a part I like better. I do apologise for the camera angle. I wasn't thinking. I'll try to do better in the future. But here I'm trying to lay down our final highlights with almost pure Pinkora, I believe, with only a hint of the original base colour mixed in, just to link them together. So yeah, picking out the sharpest creases, and that's pretty much it. And to finish up the robes, I'm going to put a glaze of Bloodletter all over them. The idea behind this is that it will basically, I thought the pink look, extreme pink highlights made the lot look a little bit oversaturated. So I thought giving the whole thing a reddish tint would make the color of the robe a bit more intense, and in retrospect, I think that worked pretty well. So yeah, glazes are often good for tying a bunch of disparate colors together. I certainly did this over on my Imperial Knight project, where I basically did an overall green glaze of army painter, and it really made the it really tied the Titan together to hideously misquote the Big Lebowski. Okay, so the final stage of the armor, edge highlight with pure warpstone glow, and that's pretty much it. One saving grace about this figure having a ton of clothes and other details is that you don't have to spend a long time batch highlighting power armor. I've got another full tactical squad to go, sitting on my desk right now, so that's going to be fun when I get around to it. But no matter, that's something for future me to deal with. On the bolter, we're going to put down a highlight of Evil Sun Scarlet and then call it done. And to finish off the metallics apart from the sword, we'll give them all a highlight of, I believe, gunmetal? Anyway, yeah, and that's pretty much it. The sword is a different beast, and we'll worry about that later. I might not even show that, because quite frankly, I'm a little embarrassed with how that turned out in the end. So, home stretch now. I did skip over the painting the leather parts, but that's pretty much standard. Rhinox hide, Doombull brown highlights, it's all good. Anyway, onto the base. So, for a start, at least 2 layers of German camo black brown. This is to get the very deepest shade. So in the end, as I mentioned previously, didn't like how the sword looked, so here I am redoing it. First off, the black metallic, Vallejo Model Air, I believe? Yes. This usually covers in, well actually this did cover in one pass, so it's all good. I'm also doing this while waiting for the German camo black brown to dry. I put the black brown on pretty wet, in order to make sure it really got in the details and like crevices on the base. I'm just gonna slow down again here. Here's where I'm doing the eyes. I believe I may have already put a wash in the eyes at first. Well, first of all, base coated the eyes white. Then put waited for those to dry, obviously, then put a wash in of Carroburg Crimson, specifically trying to focus the pooling towards the back of the lens. And finally, I'm doing an all-over glaze of Bloodletter to tint the eye overall, and the end result should be a vaguely glowing effect, which looks pretty cool, and I find it's not as fiddly as painting the lenses in a more traditional manner. Anyway, moving on. Yeah, it appears we're moving on to the next stage of the basing. This is sort of overbrushing. Actually, no, it is overbrushing. The color is flat earth, and we're going to try and leave the deepest recesses, that early shade of camo black brown. also finishing up some of the final detail. Yeah, at this stage it's more or less a case of running around the model and hunting for bits and pieces that I may have missed. So, as for other detailing, putting bits of random scatter text on the parchment. For this color, the color I used was Incubi Darkness, and I just did random jerky motions. I probably could have done a better job, but yeah, that's the unfortunate thing towards the end of most projects, is that you end up getting a little sloppy as you can just want to get the thing done and off your desk. This is less so for competition painters, rather more so for war painters, as yeah, you've got a larger backlog usually. Alright, while I was talking about how hard my life was, I put down a dry brush layer on the base of dark sand, and that finishes up the dirt component of things. Alright, so finally the rocks. I'll start with putting a base coat down of German Grey. This is pretty much my standard recipe for most things rocky, though you can often mix it up a bit, as in nature rocks often do come in a variety of colours, everything from grey, brown, black to white, so use your imagination, but do keep it consistent across your army, as yeah, you probably have already figured out at this point. What colour you paint the lip of your bases is more or less down to preference. I do prefer the just having a stark black base, but yeah, no real reason to have it or not. I just have a preference personally. Anyway. So, as I mentioned previously, I'm going to gradually try and highlight up the sword to a more brighter metal at the top. I believe the topmost flat area, I gradually work it up to silver, and I used Vallejo metal medium for the very edge highlights. So yeah, like for trying to fix up a disaster, I think it turned out pretty good. Yeah, it's good enough for tabletop. So, final work on the rocks. I'm going to put down my usual colours. First up, a mid-tone of neutral grey, I think. And sky grey for a final dry brush highlight on the rocks, and they're done. And with that, the miniature is hereby declared done by me. The sword is most definitely the component I think I need to put a lot more work in. For a start, I need to learn how to paint non-metallic metal properly. I personally find it rather tiresome, and it's hard to get going, especially with GW paints. And yeah, even doing conventional metallic shading, it does take a bit of effort for me to get right, and to properly shade it requires gradually building up shade with inks, and I didn't quite get that working the way I'd intended, but no matter, it's for tabletop, it'll do. In terms of speed, I actually knocked this one out in about 3 days, and that's while working full-time, so a couple of afternoons worth of work. That result kind of surprised me. I got kind of into it and just banged through it. So yeah, as implied by the title of this video, this is only going to be the first part of what will hopefully be a many-part series as I work through my Dark Angel army throughout and up to the conclusion of a slow grow campaign that I'm playing in. So you'll get to see all sorts: tanks, infantry, Deathwing, Ravenwing, the works. I'm also going to try and make more of an effort to record my mistakes and how I correct things as I go through it, so you get a more realistic idea of the painting process. So yeah, I think I am pretty much done. I really do hope you enjoyed watching this, and I hope you got something out of this which you can apply to your own painting. So once again, thanks for watching, good luck, and I'll see you later.